Good evening and welcome to this week's edition of Africa in Focus. Myself, Kwame, Ghanaian writer, journalist, broadcaster, podcaster, and entrepreneur. And in this week's episode of Africa in Focus, it's part two: why the white man wants to kill Ibrahim Traore, freedom or death. So that's this week's edition of Africa in Focus, a part two of why the white man wants to kill Ibrahim Traore, freedom or death. So we've had a massive response from part one. I think it's been one of the all-time podcasts for the first week. So we had a massive response. So thank you to all those of you who listened in to part one of why the white man wants to kill Captain Ibrahim Traore. Before we get into the podcast, please subscribe. So if you haven't subscribed to Ghana Africa in Focus, please do. We are on YouTube. We want to get at least 100 subscribers by the end of the year. So look out for Ghana Africa in Focus on YouTube. Hit the notification bell, meaning that every time we upload a new podcast, YouTube will notify you of it. Similarly, follow me on Spotify. Just look out for Ghana Africa in Focus on Spotify. Hit the follow button, meaning that Spotify will notify you every time we upload a new podcast. So we want to try to get 800 to 1,000 followers by the end of the year. We're nearly on 600. So thank you to all those who have subscribed to Ghana Africa in Focus on Spotify. Okay, so let's get into this week's podcast. Why the white man wants to kill Ibrahim Traore, part two. Freedom or death. So why is it freedom or death? And why this is such a pivotal moment in African history, this is by Ibrahim Traore. And it's the white man that wants to kill him. It's not the China man. It's not the Arab man. It's not the Muslim man. It's not the Indian man. It is the white man who wants to kill Ibrahim Traore. And like I said, he will use African people that look like you and I, Africans, to kill Ibrahim Traore. So, as I mentioned last week, right, this is a very, very important issue because, like I said, it's about freedom or death. And I'm going to go into detail what I mean by freedom or death. And so, what we see in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, but more so in Burkina Faso, is that it's not just about those three countries, it's about Africa, So take out, that is Burkina Faso in the news right now, along with Niger and Mali, and to a degree Senegal. This is about African sovereignty, African freedom. Freedom from what, you may say? Well, freedom from white supremacy, white terrorism, and white domination that has inflicted so much pain and hardship on the African continent for at least 1,000 years. So from enslavement to colonialism to neo-colonialism, white supremacy, white terrorism, white domination has inflicted so much pain and hardship on Africa. And the reason why I say it's freedom is because that as African people, as our nations, we have a right to be free to determine our sovereignty, determine our self-determination, and more importantly, determine our destiny. And so the white man does not want Africa to be free, because if Africa is free, they will suffer. Why would they suffer? Well, put it this way. One European or white professor of economics called Howard Nicholas, he did a presentation that went viral about a few years ago. And that presentation was about development or underdevelopment in Africa, which I'll put one day we should talk about one day on this podcast. But in that YouTube presentation, he said a very, very profound thing. He said that the West, so the white man, would never allow Africa to industrialize or develop. Because if they did, yeah, if Africa was to industrialize and develop, that would destroy the quality of life in the West and also in Asia. And so they will fight by any means necessary to ensure that no African country ever gets to a position where it develops, yeah, and industrializes to an extent. Because if it does, it's game over for them. Game over for them, right? In terms of their quality of life, in terms of the access to raw materials, and in terms of keeping virtually the white man's survival. So this is why, before going on to Traore, this is why Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana got removed, because Kwame Nkrumah was not talking just about Ghana. His vision was for United States of Africa. And so what Nkrumah did was like a showcase of what the black man, the African man, is capable of doing. Yeah? And Nkrumah said this, right? We will show to the world that given the chance, that the African or the black man is capable of managing his own affairs. And Nkrumah did this in less than 9 years. Nkrumah built more than 400 state factories that met every need of the Ghanaian. Yeah? Under Nkrumah, Ghana had a car factory. Under Nkrumah, Ghana had a national airline carrier, Ghana Airways. Under Nkrumah, Ghana was developing atomic energy, right, for renewable energy purposes. Under Nkrumah, Ghana had a comprehensive road network program that it was doing, spearheaded by the Accra-Tema motorway that was built in 1961, 2 years before Britain's M1. Under Nkrumah, Ghana, had a gold factory that was near completion. Under Nkrumah, Ghana became a net exporter of food because Nkrumah invested heavily in agriculture. Yeah? Under Nkrumah, Ghana had a rapid industrialization program. So because Nkrumah was doing this for Ghana, the West or the white man said that if we don't stop Nkrumah, this model or the example of African excellence that Nkrumah is doing, right, it could spread like wildfire to African countries. And if it did, we are stuck. Because like I said last week, right, former French presidents Jacques Chirac and Francois Mitterrand both said that essentially, without Africa, France would be a third world country. So just imagine, without Africa, the West would be nothing. So contrary to what you read in your Western press, contrary to what you're thinking about Africa, contrary to what you've been told about Africa, right? The truth of the matter is, right, the whole world, not just the West, but India, China, and whoever, they cannot function without African raw materials because our raw materials are gold and diamonds, titanium, and now lithium, the nucleus in the block, lithium, particularly used for electric vehicles, EV, yeah? And these also battery, long life battery, yeah, the solar power batteries and these other lithium type batteries that you're using, cordless lawnmowers, cordless, vacuum cleaners, etc., right? Made with lithium ore that is found in places like Ghana and DR Congo. So without these raw materials, without African raw materials, right? India, China, the West is nothing. Because they all need African raw materials for their survival. And this is why Nkrumah had to be removed, because Nkrumah was showing the way. Nkrumah was showing the template. And by the way, Nkrumah was inspired by the great African Jamaican, Marcus Mosiah Garvey. Yeah, and if you get opportunity, go and read the book that inspired Nkrumah, The Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Mosiah Garvey. So Nkrumah's template was actually a Garveyite template that Nkrumah used to good effect. And so because Nkrumah used this model of development, right, that posed a serious threat to the West. added to the unification of Africa that Nkrumah wanted. This is why Nkrumah had to be taken out. And we see this history repeating itself with Ibrahim Traore. So Ibrahim Traore, I didn't get into it deep last week, but what Ibrahim Traore is doing in Burkina Faso is revolutionary. Just give you some examples of what Ibrahim Traore is doing in Burkina Faso. So he's actually en route, on the way to redesign or recalibrate, a comprehensive road building program in Burkina Faso. Just last year, under Ibrahim Traore's leadership, right, Burkina Faso was probably the first African country to produce an electric car. Yeah. And by production of the electric car, it's part of the wider industrialization program that Captain Ibrahim Traore has embarked upon in terms of rapidly industrializing Burkina Faso. Also, his revolutionary mechanized agriculture. So he understands that a people need to feed itself. If they can't feed itself, the people will die. And so under his leadership, right, he has invested heavily in revolutionary mechanized agricultural methods to make Burkina Faso food secure. I know that, he's opened, 3 tomato factories. Yeah, because tomato is a big export earner for Burkina Faso. Yeah, so he's developed 3 tomato factories whereby, they're using the raw material, tomato, to make tomato paste. And if you know anything about African food, in African food, we use a lot of tomato paste. Yeah, for jollof rice, for our stews, for our soups, etc., etc. So, tomato paste is a big thing on the African continent. And, Ibrahim Traore is investing heavily in these tomato factories. Again, under Ibrahim Traore's leadership, right, there's now Air Burkina. Yeah, he bought a fleet of planes, yeah, to, again, create employment for these people, to invest in these people, by pilots, air stewardess, air hostesses, just air management, etc., etc., right, to revolutionize Burkina Faso's aviation industry. So these are some of the fantastic work that Captain Ibrahim Traore is doing as a model of development in Burkina Faso that other African countries could use as an example. And also we see this going on in Mali and in Niger. Yeah, but we don't know too much of those developmental programs that are going on because the leaders haven't been open, unlike Ibrahim Traore, as to what they're doing. But we know that there's a lot of development, within Mali and Niger. And so, Captain Ibrahim Traore is putting a lot of African leaders to shame because within 3 years, he's done what I just told you and a lot more that he's done. And so this is sending shockwaves for the Western world because, like Nkrumah, if they didn't take out Ibrahim Traore, this example of what he's doing could spread like wildfire to other African countries, and that would definitely jeopardize their stranglehold on the African continent that they've had for more than 400 years, from enslavement through to the the Berlin Congress of 1884, 1885, where they divided Africa like a pizza, through to colonialism, through today to neo-colonialism, where we have African leaders, or rather European project managers, disguised as African leaders, but doing the aiding and abetting of the white man. So, like I mentioned last week, Paul Biya, examples of that are Paul Biya in Cameroon, Theodore Obiang in Equatorial Guinea, Alassane Ouattara in La Côte d'Ivoire, Paul Kagame in Rwanda, Yoweri Museveni in Uganda, William Ruto in Kenya, etc. These are, as Malcolm X said, the house niggers. So Malcolm X, the great late Malcolm X, whose 100th anniversary of his birth is this year. Malcolm X said this: the house nigger and the field nigger. So the field nigger was the one who was on the plantations, doing the work, and ensuring that master survives, and that the cane or the plantation is sufficient. And they were also the ones who were rebellious, the field niggers. The house niggas now, those were the ones who had been appeased by the white slave master, and they were in the house eating the so-called good food, looking after master's kids, and etc. etc. Yeah, and they didn't want to go interfere because they were happy, they were satisfied being under the rule of the white slave master. So same way today, we have these African leaders I've just mentioned who are happy being dictated to by the West. So as long as they play ball, i.e. give the West raw materials free of charge or very, very cheaply, they don't go against the grain, they don't do things controversially, they don't say anything controversial, then, the white man will leave them alone. Those are the house niggers, right? The field nigger is Ibrahim Traore, who is out the grain, who is prepared to put his life on the line in order to develop his country and by extension, Mom Africa. And this is why you saw last week on April the 30th, yeah, the worldwide global African Day of Action to protest against the West's attempts to kill Ibrahim Traore. Yeah. So like I said, in last week, there were demonstrations in Ouagadougou, in Accra, in London, in Paris, in Berlin, in Kingston, Jamaica, in some cities in America, yeah, all over the African world, right? There were demonstrations warning the West that as right-minded thinking Africans, we will not tolerate the assassination of Captain Ibrahim Traore. So this is why I'm saying it is a matter of freedom or death. So what Ibrahim Traore represents, and Mali and Niger also, but what they represent is freedom. Freedom from Western imperialism, freedom from white supremacy, freedom from Western domination, freedom from Western terrorism, and the right to self-determine their destiny, the right to trade with whoever they want to trade, the right to have policies and programs that are for the people and that are in the interest of the people, not the interest of a Western elite or Western multinational companies. Free to make decisions for yourself that will benefit the people. Yeah. So what Ibrahim Traore represents is freedom from that kind of white domination. Yeah. But like I said last week, African emancipation is anti-white supremacy. White supremacy is anti-African emancipation. And so, like I said, this is the white man has never wanted Africa to be free, let alone develop. All that they're concerned about is Africa being where it is, being named the hero of wood and drawer of water. That all Africa should do, right, is just produce these raw materials and not add value to it, but they will add value to it, and getting dirt cheap, these raw materials that they can use for their industrial complex. And they've never wanted Africa to develop. So these so-called development programs in Africa, right? Ask yourself, all these Western NGOs that have come to Africa in the last 25, 30, 40 years, yeah, with their so-called developmental programs, these so-called NGOs, right? What you tell me, what development have they brought to it? What really, transformation development have they brought to an African country? None whatsoever. Showing you why that the West is not interested in African development, because if Africa develops, you ain't gonna get immigrants wanting to leave Africa and come to Europe. If Africa develops, right, you won't get people wanting to come to the West, particularly America or UK, and seek asylum. Yeah. And by the way, they need immigration because the West, yeah, Germany, Britain, France, Spain, Italy, Portugal, etc., right, is experiencing negative population growth. What do I mean by that? So for one death, none is born. Yeah. So for every white person that dies, they can't replace that person that dies. But in Africa, for every one person that dies, 3 is born, or even 4 is born. Yeah. So and they talk about immigration as if they don't need it, and as if it's some kind of albatross on their neck. But Europe, like I said, is experiencing population decline. And also, right, there's an aging population in a lot of European countries. UK, France, Italy, Germany, Portugal, Poland, Russia, all of these European countries, right, have aging populations. Yeah. And so they need immigration to do the jobs that, an aging population can't do, or some, British or German or French people don't want to do. Yeah. So they need immigration. So if Africa was to develop, if they would allow Africa to develop, right, Africans wouldn't bother to come, wouldn't risk their lives, fighting to get across the Sahara, and then fighting to get from North Africa to the coast areas of Europe to seek a so-called better life. It wouldn't be like that, because Africa has everything. Great food, great climate, all the raw materials that needs to industrialize, etc. Nobody in their right mind would want to leave Africa. And so this is why they want to keep Africa down. This is why they have no intention of allowing any African country to develop, and particularly industrialize, because if they do, like I said, it's game over for the white man. So this is why what Ibrahim Traore is doing in Burkina Faso is larger than Burkina Faso. And it's like I say, it's not just about Burkina Faso, it's about Africa, because if the white man kills Ibrahim Traore, then you could say it's game over for another probably 20, 30 years. Yeah? Because the same way that they killed Nkrumah, or they ousted Nkrumah in that coup in 1966, that curtailed not just Ghana's development, but also Africa's development by a good 30, 40 years. And that put fear. Nkrumah's removal put fear in his contemporaries at the time. So they knew that if they were ever to do what Nkrumah did, right, they would suffer the same fate as Nkrumah. So if the white man is successful, yeah, in killing Ibrahim Traore, that is death, not just for Burkina Faso, but the whole of Africa, because that will put fear again. Like in days of Nkrumah, they'll put fear in this current generation of African leaders who want to do the right thing and develop and industrialize their countries. So they will not do that. And that's why I say death. But before I go deeper into death, right, just want to end on freedom. Okay? And what it means to be free. Like I said, many of us don't really appreciate what it means to be free. And we're not free. Just because you have a national anthem and a flag, you're not free, beloved. We're still under white control. Yeah? White tyranny, white domination. Yeah? And this is why it's so important for Ibrahim Traore to succeed, because this dynamism, moving away from Western influence, Western control, Western manipulation, is freedom. Yeah, and freedom to do what we want, when we want, for us, by us. That's in our interest and the interest of the African continent. So let's now touch on to death. So should Ibrahim Traore be killed by the white man and his cohorts? That will kill, that will potentially kill Burkina Faso. The strides that Burkina Faso is making right now to industrialize, to become a self-sufficient country, to become food secure, to become a modern industrialized country, that could die if Ibrahim Traore is murdered by the white man. Again, this death of Ibrahim Traore will signify the death of Africa, because many African countries will, these so-called leaders, even those like Mali and Niger, who are now, on the same page as Traore, they may, they may get scared. They think that they could be next. So rather than be Pan-Africanists in their outlook, they may turn more authoritarian, right, and begin to do what the white man tells them to do, and this will signify death. And we cannot afford death as the African people, African continent. We cannot afford, for Ibrahim Traore not to succeed, because death, or rather freedom, is better than death. Death that's it, because death death does not allow you to become independent. Death does not allow you to become a critical thinker. Death does not allow you to take your destiny into your own hand. Death does not allow you to do what's in the interest of your people. And it's something that we, as a global African community, cannot countenance. The killing of another progressive African leader, that will lead to the death of our development, our industrialization, and more importantly, our not desire, but our right to take charge of our own affairs and to self-determine our own destiny as a people. So this is why we must support Ibrahim Traore, and we must warn the West that we will never allow you to take out Ibrahim Traore, because we know of the dire consequences that potentially could happen if they were successful in taking out Captain Ibrahim Traore. And these consequences will have severe repercussions, not just for Africa. Mind you, they may think that if they kill Ibrahim Traore, it could have repercussions not in Burkina Faso and other African countries, but it will also have repercussions, particularly in Europe. Yeah, because what you will see in Europe as a result, potentially, of the destabilization of certain African countries will be a massive wave of immigration from Africa to the West. And these people mean business. They will, once you destroy the African dream, they will now, take it upon themselves by any means necessary to come to Europe. And it doesn't matter what policies you got, what army you've got, whatever, these people will find a way to come to Europe. And so Europe and the West, it's in your interest, believe it or not, to leave Ibrahim Traore alone. Why? Because if you do, why, Africans are not going to leave Africa and come and swamp Europe, as some of your populist right-wing parties are already talking about. We see populism taking its way all over Europe, with Meloni in Italy, the AfD in Germany, the Front National in France, even in Britain just the other week, the local elections, Reform UK won more than 600 council seats. yeah, where they had none before. So right-wing populism, spearheaded by the fear of immigration, the fear of a black and brown Europe, yeah, is why you must leave Ibrahim Traore alone. Because if you don't, it could have severe repercussions for you that you cannot countenance and you definitely not stop. And so this is what I mean by death. Yeah, if the white man was successful in using one of our own to destroy Ibrahim Traore. And on that, there was a pathetic, comment or statement by the house nigger, African-American head of AFRICOM, which is the American, so-called African, high command, said that Ibrahim Traore is stealing from the country. Ibrahim Traore is living like a dictator. Ibrahim Traore is this. Ibrahim Traore is that. That's the same game that they did with Nkrumah, Lumumba, and Gaddafi, to mention a few. And I'm saying to our people, right, do not fall for that propaganda. Do not allow these people, these house niggers and the white man, to fool us, to make us hate, right, Ibrahim Traore to such an extent that we'll fall for their bait and end up killing this man. Because like I said, if Ibrahim Traore is murdered, we've lost our freedom, the right to determine ourselves, the right to determine our own destiny, and death in that we are being slaves, yeah, to Western domination, white supremacy, and white stranglehold on the African continent. And so I thank you for listening to this part 2 of Ibrahim Traore, why the white man wants to kill Ibrahim Traore, freedom or death. And if you like what you hear, please share to your friends, family, social media networks. Subscribe to Ghana African Focus on YouTube. Subscribe to Ghana African Focus on Spotify. And, tell your friends and family about this fantastic podcast, Ghana African Focus. Until next week, where we have a podcast coming from Ghana, that Ghana is not cheap, but expensive, particularly if you want to live a Western lifestyle. We're breaking down that. So until next week, from myself, Kwame, and from all the crew here on Africa in Focus, is thank you very much for listening. And we see you next week for some Ghana in Focus.